Hey y'all, it's Brain Cake Lab Day 2. This is what you'll need for today. You're going to need your finished cake layers, your fondant, your blood ingredients, shortening, vanilla icing, a cake board, a serrated knife, and a butter knife or icing spatula. You're going to start by stacking the first layer of your cake onto your cake board and cover that first layer with a little bit of your vanilla icing. I have a turntable here, but you can totally ice your cake on a counter. It works just the same. The turntable just makes it a little bit easier. Once I've covered my first layer, I'm going to cover the second layer with another layer of cake and begin carving out my brain. So you want to remember that your brain is very, very, very round, okay? It's not a perfect circle, but it's not square. It doesn't have any sharp corners or anything like that. So that's kind of how you want to carve. I'm taking my serrated knife and I'm taking the blade kind of at an angle, not up and down. And notice the sawing motion. It's just to help keep all the crumbs to a minimum. Notice that there's not a lot of crumbs all over the place. That's because number one, I'm using a serrated knife, that means a knife that has a whole lot of teeth on it. And number two, I'm using that sawing motion. So you might get a little tired of all the sawing, but it definitely helps to keep the crumbs down. At this point, I'm going in with a larger serrated knife. Only difference is that it's just longer, and I'm narrowing the cake on two sides. I'm making two sides of the cake very flat, just to help show how narrow a brain is, because a brain is not a perfect circle. So I'm just making the sides very, very narrow, and I'm making everything else very round. I'm continuing to make everything super round. This is why your cake absolutely must be totally chilled, either chilled or frozen. Next up, you're going to cover your cake in your vanilla icing. Just a thin layer will do. No one's going to see this layer, but it's just going to act as a layer of glue to kind of help the fondant noodles, I call them brain noodles, help the fondant pieces stick. You can use either an icing spatula or a butter knife to ice your cake, as long as you're going in long continuous motions. Once it's fully iced, you're going to put it in the refrigerator to chill while we make our brain noodles. You may need to handle your fondant with lightly greased hands depending on how sticky it is or how wet. If it's really, really dry, you probably won't need it, but mine was just kind of in between. Grab a small handful of your fondant and begin rolling it into a spaghetti noodle by rolling it back and forth on your countertop until it gets long and narrow. This is probably the easiest skill that we remember from preschool when we were playing with our Play-Doh. You're just going to keep doing this, and that's the full brain noodle process, guys. Just continually making a whole bunch of brain noodles. You're going to need them. I would say maybe make 10 to 12 noodle pieces just to give you enough to work with. And of course, you're doing this while your cake is chilling in the fridge. Notice that every time I finish making my noodles, I place them on the counter somewhere, but I'm trying to make sure that they don't touch, otherwise they'll get kind of sticky and get stuck together. But this is the full process, guys, doing a whole bunch of brain noodles, because you're going to need it to cover your brain cake. So I'm just going to continue grabbing handfuls. If you ever end up with a piece that's way too long, just break it apart. No one's measuring your brain noodles. Miss Nathan, how long does it have to be? However long you can make it. It does not have to be a specific length. Once I've made all of my noodles, I took my butter knife and I actually just made a midsection right down the middle of my brain. I'm going to use that as a guide to kind of split my brain into the two hemispheres. So I'm just going to cover my cake with my brain noodles on one half of the brain and then begin working on the other half. Now I'm using one hand to kind of hold my noodle and the other hand to help guide the noodle on and press it really, really firmly onto the cake. See that? And there's no particular design that you're going for because no two brains have the exact same wrinkles, right? So make your cake very unique, but just try to make it look really realistic. When you're applying your brain noodles, also remember that you don't want any spaces, any gaps in between your noodles. You want them to kind of be stacked right on top of each other just to kind of give the visual effect of having like deep wrinkles. Here I am adding some brain noodles to the top of one of my hemispheres. And this is pretty much the full process for making your cake look like a brain. The only key that I would suggest is that you make sure there are no gaps in between your noodles. Make sure there's no gaps. They should be right up next to each other, which is why you need so many noodles. It may seem like it's too many at first, but once you start making your wrinkle designs back and forth and up and down, you'll realize that you're pretty much going to need all of it. So here I've completed half of my brain cake, working on the second half, filling it with more of those brain noodles. Until my entire cake is completely covered. And now it's time to make the blood. So these three ingredients are notorious for being extremely messy, so it's very important that you be very careful. In one mixing bowl, you're going to add red food coloring, your honey, and your strawberry or raspberry jam or jelly. Either one works. I'm using a pastry brush to help mix my colors together, and it makes it easier to cover the brain with the blood. If you don't have one, you'll use a spoon and just kind of drip the blood on top of the brain just until it gets everywhere, and you can use the back of the spoon to help spread it around. The pastry brush I'm using is also known as a barbecue brush in larger sizes. So if you don't have a pastry brush, if you don't have a barbecue brush, please feel free to use a regular spoon and just kind of drip your blood all over your cake, being sure to get into all of those tiny little crevices as best you can. Even if you use a paper towel and dip the paper towel in the blood and then start applying it to your brain, that also works really well. So you're going to continue covering your cake until it looks like this. And I like to leave a little bit of blood on the plate just to make it look like a fresh brain. All right, guys, enjoy and have fun.